Okay, tonight we're stepping into a world where appearances are deceiving, where a quiet neighborhood can hide unspeakable horrors behind closed doors. Imagine walking through the streets of Mexico City, the chatter of life all around you, unaware that in the shadows, a predator walks disguised in the most unassuming form. Welcome to Criminal Mindcast, the podcast where we tell true crime stories not just with facts, but with silence, with the haunting weight of what was never said. Tonight, we delve into an unsolved mystery that eventually revealed a chilling glimpse into human darkness. This story follows Juana Barraza, Mexico's notorious granny killer, tracing her life, her calculated crimes, and the cold cases connected to her. Through these events, we uncover a dark past filled with trauma, obsession, and secrets that few could have imagined lurking beneath a seemingly ordinary life. The early 2000s in Mexico City were a time of contrasts, where life pulsed in vibrant streets, yet darkness hid behind ordinary facades. Markets overflowed with noise and energy, yet in quiet neighborhoods, elderly women lived alone, isolated from the bustle of urban life. Few noticed the subtle tension creeping through these areas, a sense that something was amiss. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, bodies of older women began appearing in their homes, victims of circumstances no one could immediately explain. These deaths were unsettling in their consistency and method. There were no signs of forced entry, no theft, and no obvious struggle. Yet the outcome was always the same. Elderly women, often over 70, found dead under suspicious circumstances. Each case suggested deliberate planning, a pattern so precise that investigators began to suspect a single, methodical perpetrator. The predictability of the crimes spread unease through neighborhoods. Families whispered anxiously about the safety of their elders. Neighbors grew wary of strangers, and the city's subtle undercurrent of fear deepened, often unnoticed by the broader population immersed in daily life. The victims themselves were ordinary, quiet women. Retired teachers, former nurses, homemakers, or widows living in aging apartments. Their days were shaped by routine, care for family, and small acts of kindness. Many had devoted themselves to grandchildren, or maintained modest homes with diligence. Over time, however, estrangement, isolation, and the passage of years had left them vulnerable, with limited support networks to shield them from harm. Amid the bustling streets of Mexico City, Juana Barraza emerged as a figure both ordinary and unsettling. In her 40s, physically strong, disciplined, and trained as a professional wrestler, she moved through the city with ease, blending seamlessly into crowds. To casual observers, she appeared calm, unremarkable, even trustworthy. Yet beneath this composed exterior lay a calculated strategy, a carefully constructed persona, designed to gain access to vulnerable women without raising suspicion. Known as La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence, Juana often posed as a social worker or government aide. Carrying forged documents, speaking with confidence, and offering assistance, she made herself appear credible to elderly women. Neighbors and passers-by saw only a helpful presence, unaware that her identity concealed darker intentions. Juana's calm exterior masked a deeply fractured psyche shaped by trauma. Her childhood was marked by neglect and abuse, including a turbulent relationship with her mother, who reportedly sold her to strangers for personal gain. These early betrayals fostered lasting anger, emotional isolation, and a detachment from social norms, forming the foundation for her later violent behavior. Juana Barraza's psychological foundation shaped both her actions and her selection of victims. Elderly women reminded her of authority figures from her past, particularly her mother, embodying betrayal, vulnerability, and unresolved conflict. Her crimes were not random. They represented a symbolic reenactment of internalized trauma. Each encounter allowed her to project anger and exercise control over individuals she perceived as weak, obedient, and symbolic, creating a recurring pattern central to her criminal behavior. Mexico City's urban environment amplified both opportunity and anonymity. Sprawling streets, dense populations, and labyrinthine neighborhoods offered an ideal setting for a predator to act undetected. Crowded markets, hidden alleys, and apartment complexes provided numerous points of access. The elderly, often isolated and neglected by both family and social institutions, became easy targets. In this context, safety was largely illusory, as the vibrant energy of the city masked the systematic predation occurring behind closed doors. Neighborhoods that once felt secure developed a subtle tension. Corridors, stairwells, and courtyards seemed quieter yet heavier with unease. Women trusted routines and neighbors, blind to danger. This contrast of apparent safety and hidden threat defined Juana's crimes, illustrating the intersection of environment, opportunity, and predatory intent. Each of Juana Barraza's crimes was executed with careful, deliberate planning. She observed her victims over time, studying their routines, habits, and vulnerabilities. Approaching under the guise of assistance, she built trust and familiarity, ensuring privacy before acting with precision. Her behavior reflected both psychological insight and tactical skill, exploiting social norms and expectations to minimize resistance. Mexico City's dense, sprawling neighborhoods provided concealment, allowing her movements to go unnoticed. Over time, investigators noticed a pattern: similar victims, consistent methods, and no forced entry or theft, revealing the calculated nature of her crimes. Juana's duality was stark. To outsiders, she appeared helpful, ordinary, even kind. Behind closed doors, however, she enacted violence with calculated purpose. This juxtaposition of caregiver and predator reflects a complex interplay of survival mechanisms, learned behavior, and unresolved trauma. Her case demonstrates how appearances can be deceiving and how societal assumptions, particularly regarding gender and physical capability, can obscure the presence of real danger. The city itself became a silent witness to her crimes. Its bustling streets, crowded markets, and narrow alleys created a network of concealment. Every quiet apartment, every friendly smile, every daily interaction carried potential risk. Juana exploited the very systems designed to protect the vulnerable, turning familiarity and routine into tools for her crimes. Each act was both opportunistic and symbolic, a manifestation of unresolved trauma, translating into destructive behavior. By the time residents sensed the magnitude of the threat, the patterns were well established. Anxiety settled into the neighborhoods as elderly women began to question the trust they extended to strangers. The public narrative shifted from security to suspicion, yet few could imagine the scale of Juana's orchestrated terror. What had begun as isolated incidents evolved into a pattern of fear, demonstrating how vulnerability, trust, and opportunity can intersect with devastating consequences. In the end, the illusion of safety was shattered. Streets and apartments once familiar became spaces of psychological tension. Juana's dual life, publicly calm, privately violent, revealed the fragility of human assumptions, leaving a legacy of fear, trauma, and reflection on the complexities of human nature. Mexico City in the early 2000s became a stage where darkness and ordinary life collided, and Juana Barraza's crimes etched themselves into the collective memory of the city. The chronology of Juana Barraza's crimes reveals not only meticulous planning, but also a deeply disturbing pattern. Take, for example, an 82-year-old woman, last seen speaking with a friendly, unassuming visitor who claimed to represent social services. The visitor's demeanor seemed warm, trustworthy, and ordinary, appearing to offer nothing more than assistance. Yet this seemingly mundane interaction became the final encounter for the victim. Juana's methods relied less on brute force than on manipulation, exploiting trust and the natural expectation of safety that the elderly often carry. Her approach was subtle, strategic, and calculated, creating an illusion of normalcy that masked the danger beneath. On November 25, 2005, the victim was discovered in her apartment. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. A rope around her neck indicated a brief struggle, resolved swiftly through Juana's superior physical strength. Forensic evidence was scarce, cameras in the vicinity were non-functional, and neighbors could recall only fleeting details. A tall, strong woman, hair dyed, carrying a red handbag, moving calmly and without haste. The absence of conventional forensic markers, combined with her meticulous planning, initially baffled investigators, leaving them without a clear suspect. This incident was not isolated. Soon, authorities noticed a recurring pattern. Elderly women, living alone or in vulnerable conditions, were found dead under eerily similar circumstances. Each crime scene bore subtle signatures, precise entry with minimal disturbance, a brief but decisive struggle, and sudden fatal resolution. This consistency was chilling yet revealing, enabling criminal profilers to begin mapping the offender's behavioral tendencies. They recognized the combination of physical prowess, psychological manipulation, and targeted victim selection, all pointing to a predator who was patient, calculated, and intimately familiar with her victim's vulnerabilities. Investigators were initially misled by assumptions. The physical strength required to overpower her victims suggested a male perpetrator. Conventional expectations for serial predation did not accommodate a middle-aged woman as the primary suspect. Consequently, several innocent individuals were detained and questioned, only to be released when evidence failed to support accusations. Meanwhile, media coverage sensationalized the killings, branding the unknown assailant La Mata Viejitas, the little old lady killer. Fear spread across neighborhoods. Ordinary activities, such as opening the door to a visitor or accepting help, became fraught with anxiety, altering daily life for Mexico City's elderly residents. A critical breakthrough occurred when forensic analysis revealed that fingerprints recovered from one of the crime scenes matched those of a woman previously registered as a professional wrestler. This revelation immediately upended prior assumptions about the identity and capabilities of the perpetrator. Investigators had been operating under traditional expectations, assuming that the level of physical force implied a male offender. The connection forced law enforcement to reconsider their approach and redirected the investigation entirely. The public, too, was confronted with a startling paradox: extraordinary violence executed by an apparently ordinary middle-aged woman. Juana Barraza's life, previously unremarkable in appearance, concealed a level of calculated skill, physical strength, and psychological manipulation that challenged societal assumptions about gender and criminal capability. Suddenly, the narrative shifted from fear of an unknown male assailant to the uncomfortable reality that danger can exist behind the most unsuspecting faces, hidden in plain sight, masked by normality and social trust. Reconstructing the timeline of events revealed both opportunity and obsessive intent. Each crime was sequential, deliberate, and executed with a psychological purpose beyond mere physical violence. Juana's actions appeared to externalize unresolved trauma, with her victims serving as proxies for deeper emotional wounds. Her crimes were symbolic, each act reflecting the anger, resentment, and psychological scars rooted in her tumultuous childhood. The careful selection of victims, the repeated method, and the precise execution of each act created a narrative that investigators struggled to decode, offering insight into the interplay of trauma, obsession, and predatory behavior. As the pattern emerged, questions became unavoidable. How could one individual navigate a sprawling, chaotic urban environment, repeatedly striking without detection? How could internalized trauma manifest so consistently in externalized violence? These questions were not solely investigative. They were philosophical, probing the limits of human behavior and the ways unhealed psychological wounds can shape destructive action. Juana's methods, precise and deliberate, highlighted the unsettling capacity for trauma to transform into methodical cruelty, a fusion of anger and skill executed under the guise of civility. The consistency of her crimes also demonstrated a keen understanding of human expectation and social norms. Elderly women, conditioned to trust helpers, caregivers, and governmental institutions, became vulnerable precisely because of their adherence to societal rules. Juana exploited this trust with cold calculation. Her actions were both opportunistic and symbolic, targeting the weak while simultaneously enacting a personal narrative of retribution. Investigators recognized that each victim was chosen not randomly, but with intent, reflecting Juana's internal psychological landscape projected outward. By the time law enforcement fully appreciated the scope of her actions, a sense of unease had settled over the city. Residents felt an instinctive anxiety, a premonition that the ordinary might conceal danger. Neighborhoods once considered safe now carried subtle tension. Every door, every interaction, every routine activity carrying latent risk. Juana moved through this urban maze undetected, exploiting the very structures meant to protect the vulnerable. The city itself, with its dense streets, crowded markets, and labyrinthine apartments, became both her shield and her canvas, allowing her pattern of predation to unfold with precision and minimal exposure. Ultimately, the timeline of Juana Barraza's crimes reveals far more than isolated murders. It highlights the intersection of opportunity, psychological trauma, and meticulous planning, showing how unresolved emotional pain can manifest as deliberate harm. Her actions expose the intricate dynamics between environment, vulnerability, and human behavior, revealing a predator who manipulated trust and exploited expectation. By weaponizing social norms and everyday routines, she transformed ordinary life into a landscape of fear. Juana's crimes offer a haunting window into a mind shaped by trauma, calculated strategy, and the chilling capacity to turn familiarity into danger. Once Juana Barraza was identified, the full scope of her crimes began to emerge, revealing the complexity of both her psychological profile and the societal reactions surrounding her. Early investigations had been hindered by assumptions, overlooked evidence, and a prevailing bias that serial killers were overwhelmingly male. Authorities initially focused on male suspects, misinterpreted behavioral cues, and made procedural errors, including detaining individuals entirely unrelated to the crimes. For months, the city remained in a state of anxious uncertainty, unable to comprehend the methodical pattern of terror that had quietly unfolded. It was only after DNA evidence definitively linked the crimes to Juana that investigators could recognize the true scale of her actions, connecting decades of silent violence to a single, calculated mind. The public response was immediate, intense, and multifaceted. Media outlets seized on the novelty of a female serial killer, a rare and therefore sensational anomaly. Newspapers, television, and early online forums amplified the narrative, creating an atmosphere of pervasive fear. Residents bolted doors, scrutinized strangers, and even second-guessed familiar neighbors. Juana's moniker, La Mata Viejitas, or the Little Old Lady Killer, became a ghostly symbol, blending myth with reality. Families of victims endured the double burden of grief and relentless media attention, their private sorrow transformed into public spectacle. This response reflected not only fear, but the cultural shock of recognizing such violence could emanate from a figure perceived as ordinary and maternal. Criminologists, psychologists, and journalists offered several theoretical frameworks to interpret Juana's behavior. One prominent hypothesis emphasized maternal resentment. Juana's childhood had been marked by neglect and betrayal, particularly by her mother, who reportedly exploited her for personal gain. Each elderly victim may have symbolized the maternal figure she both feared and hated, a projection of unresolved anger and childhood trauma. A second theory focused on power dynamics. Juana, a woman navigating social contexts historically dominated by men, may have sought to assert control, dominance, and capability through her crimes. Violence became a means to reclaim agency in a society that had marginalized her. A third explanation centered on the lasting impact of childhood trauma, illustrating how neglect, abuse, and emotional deprivation can create compulsions toward predation later in life. While these theories differ in focus, they intersect to provide a multi-layered understanding of Juana's psyche, revealing the interplay between personal history, social circumstance, and criminal intent. At the core of these analyses is the concept of symbolic reenactment. Each act of violence appeared to serve dual purposes: the immediate physical elimination of a target and a cathartic expression of unresolved emotional conflict. Elderly women living alone became surrogates for Juana's past suffering, embodying both the rejection she experienced and the figures she resented. Her methods, carefully planned, consistently executed, and designed to avoid detection, demonstrated an acute understanding of human behavior. She leveraged trust, societal expectations, and the routines of her victims to create opportunities for control. This careful orchestration of crime highlighted not only physical capability, but also psychological sophistication, a chilling testament to how trauma can manifest in calculated harm. Despite accumulating evidence and detailed profiling, essential questions remained. Was Juana fully aware of the symbolic and psychological implications of her acts, or were they the inevitable consequences of unprocessed trauma? Could earlier intervention have prevented some of the deaths had social assumptions been different? The case challenges listeners to confront profound moral and philosophical dilemmas. How does one reconcile human fragility with the capacity for deliberate malevolence? How does society understand the mechanisms by which personal suffering becomes externalized as systematic violence? These questions resist easy answers, leaving the audience to grapple with ambiguity, reflection, and discomfort. Further complicating understanding is Juana's dual identity. To the outside world, she appeared calm, ordinary, and even helpful, navigating her environment with the careful precision of someone accustomed to observation and calculation. Behind closed doors, however, she enacted violence with decisive intent. This duality underscores the complexity of human behavior. Appearances can deceive, and social norms, particularly assumptions about gender and nurturing roles, can obscure latent danger. Her actions demonstrate that trauma, skill, and calculated intent can intersect in ways that defy conventional expectations, leaving both investigators and the public struggling to comprehend how ordinary life can conceal extraordinary malice. The media's portrayal of Juana both illuminated and distorted public perception. Headlines focused on the rarity of a female serial killer, emphasizing shock over analysis. Sensationalized coverage contributed to heightened fear and distrust within neighborhoods, altering daily life for elderly residents. Meanwhile, criminologists and psychologists worked to parse the underlying patterns, seeking to extract meaningful lessons from her behavior. Her case became a study in contrasts: public panic versus private investigation, myth versus method, and the visible persona versus the concealed predator. Each layer offered insight into how societies interpret, respond to, and sometimes misread criminal behavior. At its essence, Juana Barraza's story examines the convergence of unresolved trauma, opportunity, and social environment. Each murder reflected both a reenactment of past suffering and a meticulously calculated exercise of control. Her crimes exposed the fragility of societal assumptions, revealing how isolation and trust can render vulnerable populations susceptible to predation. The case demonstrated how the human psyche can externalize internal torment, transforming personal anguish into deliberate violence. For investigators, understanding Juana required more than analyzing physical evidence. It demanded insight into psychological patterns, behavioral cues, and symbolic significance. Her story underscores the necessity of interpreting criminal behavior beyond surface actions, revealing the complex interplay between past trauma, methodical intent, and societal dynamics. Ultimately, confronting Juana Barraza's crimes forces a reckoning with uncomfortable truths. Human behavior exists along a continuum, shaped by past experiences, environmental factors, and individual choices. The capacity for orchestrated malevolence can reside behind a seemingly ordinary exterior, challenging assumptions about safety, trust, and morality. As listeners consider her motivations, the enduring question remains: how do we reconcile the ordinariness of a person with the extraordinary consequences of their actions? This moral and psychological puzzle is unresolved, leaving an indelible impression of fear, reflection, and the chilling reality of human potential for harm. To understand Juana Barraza is to peer into a mind forged by persistent adversity, betrayal, and deeply internalized rage. Her psychological profile reveals a sophisticated interplay of childhood trauma, environmental influence, and personality development. Abandoned and exploited by her mother, Juana internalized both fear and resentment, learning early that trust could be manipulated and that vulnerability invited harm. Each elderly victim she selected became a symbolic representation of her past suffering, allowing her to externalize years of emotional turmoil through carefully structured actions. The violence she enacted was deliberate, calculated, and informed not merely by physical capability, but by acute insight into human behavior and social vulnerabilities, revealing a mind both methodical and psychologically complex. Her mindset defies simple categorization. Juana's motivations were multi-layered, a desire to exact revenge against the maternal archetype that had betrayed her, an assertion of power and control over a society that marginalized women like her, and a compulsion to externalize unresolved trauma in a tangible, structured form. She was not driven by financial gain, notoriety, or immediate gratification. Each act served a dual purpose: the physical removal of the victim and a psychological reenactment of her own suffering. The ritualistic precision with which she selected targets, executed the crimes, and manipulated circumstances indicates a striking combination of conscious planning and unconscious repetition, reflecting the inseparable link between personal history and outward behavior. By 2006, Juana Barraza's careful orchestration came to an end with her apprehension. The confessions revealed a staggering number of victims, confirming suspicions and exposing a previously unrecognized serial pattern. The judicial process became as much a study of her composure as of her crimes. Sentenced to 759 years in prison, Juana maintained an almost eerie calm, her demeanor unnerving observers. She exhibited minimal emotional response, quietly acknowledging her actions and the consequences, a psychological self-containment that amplified the dissonance between outward appearance and inner intent. It was a chilling demonstration of the human capacity to mask extreme violence beneath a veneer of ordinary composure. Philosophical and psychological frameworks offer further insight into her behavior. From a Stoic perspective, we understand that we cannot choose our circumstances, but we can choose our response. Juana's response, however, was anger, revenge, and calculated harm. By situating her actions within the context of persistent neglect, childhood trauma, and societal indifference, one gains a clearer understanding of the interplay between circumstance, choice, and compulsion. Her crimes illuminate how unresolved psychological wounds can crystallize into deliberate harm when combined with opportunity, insight, and methodical intent. It is a stark reminder that human behavior cannot be interpreted solely through observable actions. The underlying context, history, and psyche are critical to understanding motive and pattern. Her selection of elderly women as victims exemplifies the symbolic nature of her crimes. These women represented authority, maternal figures, and perceived vulnerability simultaneously. Juana's actions were not random acts of violence, but carefully orchestrated, psychologically resonant reenactments of her own experiences of betrayal and marginalization. Each murder allowed her to exercise control, confront imagined representations of past pain, and impose order on a world that had previously offered her none. The repetition of her methodology, combined with her strategic exploitation of trust, social norms, and environmental factors, highlights a chilling mastery of psychological manipulation. The societal response to Juana's crimes was equally revealing. Media coverage sensationalized the novelty of a female serial killer, amplifying fear and uncertainty across neighborhoods. Families of victims were caught between grief and the intrusive scrutiny of a public fascinated by her anomaly. Neighborhoods once considered safe now carried an undercurrent of suspicion, illustrating how her crimes not only harmed individuals, but also destabilized community trust. Juana's story demonstrates that the consequences of trauma and violence extend beyond the immediate acts, permeating social consciousness and collective perception of security. In examining her psychological framework, one must consider the cumulative effects of neglect, abuse, and social marginalization. Juana's experiences in childhood, exploitation by her mother, emotional abandonment, and early exposure to betrayal, created patterns of thought and behavior that manifested in her adult actions. These unresolved psychological wounds interacted with opportunity and physical capability, resulting in a methodical, repeated predation. Her actions were a chilling testament to how environmental conditions, social structure, and personal history intersect to create the potential for extreme human behavior. Yet, despite this understanding, key questions persist. Are individuals like Juana born with an innate predisposition toward violence, or are they forged by the trauma and neglect imposed upon them? Her life forces reflection on the moral, psychological, and societal dimensions of crime. It challenges us to consider how society responds to vulnerability, how childhood adversity is addressed or ignored, and how the latent potential for harm can go unnoticed until tragedy manifests. Juana Barraza is not merely a figure of horror. She is a complex study in the consequences of trauma, a mirror reflecting both personal pain and systemic failure. Ultimately, her story asks us to confront uncomfortable truths about human behavior. The granny killer is both an ordinary woman and a calculated predator, a juxtaposition that unsettles assumptions about gender, capability, and the outward appearance of morality. Each crime she committed was a deliberate intersection of psychological projection, opportunity, and learned behavior. By analyzing her life, one gains insight not only into the mind of a serial offender, but also into the broader societal and philosophical questions surrounding responsibility, empathy, and the consequences of neglect. Juana Barraza exemplifies the unsettling reality that the seeds of extraordinary violence often lie hidden within ordinary human experiences, shaped and amplified by circumstance, trauma, and deliberate choice. In the end, we are left with a haunting question. Are monsters born or forged by the wounds inflicted upon them? Juana Barraza's life illustrates the fragile intersection of innate predisposition and environmental influence. Her story challenges us to confront human vulnerability alongside calculated malice. The granny killer is more than a figure of terror. She is a profound psychological case, a person whose existence probes morality, trauma, and the intricate workings of the criminal mind. In the quiet streets of Mexico City, whispers persist of the woman known as the granny killer, a figure who moved unnoticed, exploiting trust and isolation. Juana Barraza's story is more than a chronicle of crime. It is a mirror reflecting unresolved pain, societal neglect, and the human capacity for both resilience and destruction. Her victims' lives, the fear that permeated neighborhoods, and the eventual unraveling of her crimes illustrate the consequences of unaddressed trauma intersecting with opportunity and circumstance. True crime, in this context, becomes a lens through which we examine ourselves, our communities, and the systems we trust to protect the vulnerable. If fear is a mirror, what do we see when we look within? How do past wounds shape future actions? And how does society respond to prevent or exacerbate those cycles? Don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe for more true crime stories. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.